Yeah. So as you probably remember from last winter, or I'm the curriculum person representing a larger group of people. So I'm Kirsten, and so I'm going to be going through with you some of the new exciting things that are being added to the units and little tweaks that are being made. This is going to be kind of a whirlwind because I'm going to try to touch on like everything. And so it's like typed up in your notes on page 43 to 44 is kind of an overview of all the things I'm touching on. But you can also, there's my email on there, and network leaders can help you if you have questions about anything. Hopefully I'll go fast enough that we have time for questions at the end. So that's just a warning, okay? Thank you for being patient with my fastness. Okay, so all the things that have been added or changed is based on a lot of feedback we've been getting from you. So hopefully these respond to some of the concerns you've been having or things you've realized you wanted or needed in your classroom, and also based on what we're learning from our research about how students are doing on assessments and in classes about supports they need. So this is my list. The first new thing we're going to talk about are README documents. So we realize our units are a complex, multi-layered set of lessons, activities, and so to support you in deciding what pieces of the unit you can make decisions about, should I be doing this 2-turtle thing or this 1-turtle, what should I be doing in lesson 5? So we've created README documents that outline the variety of choices you can make in each unit, and so these are so you can really tailor these units to your students' needs. So the first page, and I believe this is in your packet, yes, 45 and 46 outlines choices under each lesson, and then you have a chart that also kind of shows the unit kind of graphically. Systems and scale is a much easier one than plants. So within these README documents, it's kind of come to our attention and through other conversations that the plant unit sits apart from the other macroscopic units of animals and systems and scale and decomposers, as the investigations were divided into 2 lessons. So we're moving from this instructional model in plants where we had the 2 investigations and moving both investigations into lesson 3. So that means there's going to be a single evidence-based arguments tool in the unit. Students will fill out part of it after light and dark and part of it after matter change, so they can look at how evidence across the 2 investigations really informs the arguments they can make. Other changes, we're adding in some additional suggestions about, we know plant growth is a tricky thing in a lot of your classrooms and ending up with radish plants at the right size, the right times, not always working. So some options about how you can know if your plants are ready and choices you can make. I can use house plants is one suggestion we have. If your radishes aren't ready to do light dark, let them keep growing for matter change and use some house plants for light dark. So there's options there as you're thinking about these. And all of these are outlined on the README document for plants, which you don't have the example of because it's in progress still. But the other note for plants is that you're going to have some choice now in what order to do the 3 processes in. We heard some feedback like photosynthesis not being first was causing some confusion, like why isn't photosynthesis the first one we explain? Why did we start with cellular respiration? So we're leaving that a choice open to you. So if your students have a lot of question or are curious about photosynthesis, start there. Or maybe they're more curious about the cellular respiration piece of things, so you can think about which order to do it in. So that's README documents. The next thing I want to touch on are the pre and post tests. So we had gotten some feedback, and this is just about the questions themselves, not about the online system, which I can't speak about. So the questions themselves have been slightly changed, some of them, to make them clearer and easier for your students to respond to and understand the formatting of. We don't want the format of the questions to interfere with your students' ability to answer them. So later this afternoon, you'll be looking at some assessment questions. The first one of those, the systems and scale one, is an updated version. So you can see what that looks like. The general questions are the same. It's kind of like the all, some, none has been altered to make that, we heard feedback that that was complicated, so some streamlining of questions. So the general content of the questions is generally the same. It's the response formatting that is changing like the options they have and kind of the layout. So hopefully it'll be a positive change, but you're still getting the same information on the content from the questions. On the online assessment system, all the questions have now been updated. So they're ready for you to already give systems and scale or the full pretest to your students. That's been updated. So another aspect that's being added are readings for students. So we're thinking of these readings in two different categories. We have storyline readings, which kind of help your students see how the pieces of the unit fit together. And we talked about this a bit this morning with the discourse routines and tying back earlier. So in your packet, you'll see an example of the intro reading that's being added in Animals on 47 and 48. So we're tying into a specific scientist to kind of like, this is what this scientist did in the process, and how does this relate to your role as questioner, investigator, and explainer to make the storyline more apparent to the students. And so in addition to those storyline readings that are kind of help connect pieces, there's also content readings that are being added to kind of reinforce the big like process information in the unit. So what exactly did we learn about combustion? Okay, here's a reading about it to kind of reinforce these ideas. Here's a reading about photosynthesis, reinforce these ideas. And those content readings are accompanied by graphic organizers in the Animals, Plants, and Decomposers, where there's multiple processes for them to keep track of. So they can fill in a piece of their graphic organizer after each process and kind of connect the pieces together and keep track. So just more scaffolds for your students who may be struggling thinking, and this came from also talking with those of you who are in middle school, like connecting the pieces. This is a lot to keep track of, so hopefully helping with that. Discourse routine information, which you heard a lot about this morning, is being explicitly added to the assessing and grading documents for the process tools. So you'll have some support with enacting these discourse routines using those assessing and grading documents. So those assessing and grading documents don't just need to be what you pull out after your students have handed in your sheets. They have some prompts on there, especially evidence-based arguments about like questions you can ask your students while they're filling out these tool. So really thinking of assessing like it happens in the moment as they're filling out this tool as well as after you pick them up. So that's being added to those documents on the top of them. The evaluating explanations piece you saw earlier, yeah. The teacher's copy, yeah. The evaluating explanations piece you saw this morning. So that's the checklist on the back of the 3 questions handout. Yeah, so we see that checklist on the back of the 3 questions handout can be applied to any explanations they're writing in these. It's not specific to just cellular respiration, those questions on the back of the 3 questions handout. But then we'll have the sample explanations for the specific processes, the better and not so good explanations for your students to look at and use as you see appropriate. So the last lesson in system scales, animals, decomposers, plants is a lesson in which they're supposed to apply this explanation they've developed to other things. So in systems and scale, it's applying to other fuels, and in animals, it's other animals. So they're supposed to, this is the idea that, oh, we can explain cows, but we can still use this to explain other things. So previously, it was a worksheet that looked like this in plants, you may recall, while they were drawing the arrows on the cells, and one student had lettuce, and the other group had a tree, and the other group had a daisy. We're making this a little richer of an activity by focusing on very particular plants that have something special about them. So for example, so adding in, we're looking at 3 different plants, and they all have something a little bit different about them that makes them, they've like explained this general plant, but here's the cactus. The cactus is a little bit different from that radish you grew. These processes are still happening inside of it, but there's something a little special about how it's like conserving water. So providing this reading so students can see like, yes, there are unique plants and animals that do this a little differently, but the general story is the same. And to go along with these readings, there's a worksheet for your students to complete that includes writing an explanation about these processes in the plants in kind of a graphic organizer format, and then some test-like questions about that specific organism, the prickly pear. but essentially, they don't need to know really specifics about the prickly pear. It's really applying it to, yes, this question asked about the prickly pear, but I also know that what I learned about radishes still applies here. So it's not like testing if they're an expert on prickly pear after reading this. So this would still be used as a jigsaw activity, with some students doing prickly pear, some students doing marsh grass, some students doing the pine tree, and then like comparing across. And that comparing across, and this holds true for, we're doing the same thing for like fuels in system and scale. And then in animals, plants, and decomposers, the follow-up lesson is kind of writing the summary explanation for all animals or all plants. And so we're adding in an option of that lesson if you choose to connect back across the unit. So I think in the winter, we showed you a comparison between plants and animals explanation activity that could fill that hole. Well, not hole, but add in to enrich that lesson. So adding in those so in animals, they could do a summary animal explanation, or you could have your students compare across a flame and an animal. So there's some interesting comparisons your students probably already made, thinking about how is combustion similar to what processes I've modeled with my molecular models. That comes out a lot. And so adding that in as an option at the end of the units. We also talked back in winter about big idea probes, and I know you saw them in your LMS. So they're being added into the units as optional. So in the lessons that it would make sense that we recommend you do them in, they'll be written into the teacher's guide. So it's clear to you and you can remember that, oh, that's a good place to do that again. And so we hope that you'll use those and that will be helpful to track your students' ideas. And it's also, we see another way to, they're similar to, and I heard this morning, they're similar to the test assessment items, right? So your students get some practice with that format of item, true, false, disagree, agree, and explaining. The community connections activities we also talked about in the winter, and they've kind of evolved to make them something that we see these activities as activities that you can use after the unit to help your students tie in what they learned in the unit to things they see in their communities or schools or homes. So they're short, kind of 1 to 2 class periods to look at some way we can apply what we've learned to our life. So in system and scale, it's looking at natural gas use. So how much natural gas are we using? And what does that mean? And so we hope these activities will push your students to think like, okay, we finished this unit, but I don't have all the answers. Like I still have things that I can wonder about, and this learning also applies to things in my own life that I can care about and experience. And so those will be optional. So you could say, oh, I want to do this after systems and scale, but maybe I don't have time after animals, but I do have time after plants. So they're flexible. So if you do one, you don't have to do them all, kind of thing. We're adding, so I don't know, how many of you taught ecosystems? Yes, a couple. Okay, so right now there's the meadow simulation that allows your students to see the biomass pyramid, and they learn there's always 9 foxes. But so we're, in addition to that, to help students see how carbon moves between pools, in our large-scale research have learned that students differentiating between pools and fluxes, so the movement of carbon between pools, is a complicated idea. There's things moving in different directions, like the pool is not the flux and the flux is not the pool. So developing a simulation that will help your students like work through these ideas, like, okay, if the flux gets bigger, what's happening to each pool? Like, what does this mean? If the pools get smaller, so this is going to be in place of, right now in ecosystems, there's these PowerPoints, if you taught it, that show the carbon moving. And so this will be something your students can use to have more like hands-on investment in this, figuring out these pools and fluxes. So that's in the works and will be done hopefully soon. It's proving more challenging than we thought it would be to get from mathematical models to working simulation, but it's getting there. Oh, it'll be, yeah. No. It'll be soon. It'll be soon. It's in the What's New update. It'll be this school year. So last winter I mentioned about genetics. There's a few people in our like carbon time related group that are thinking about how we can apply these ideas, such as the 3 questions, to genetics. So Wendy Johnson, who we've talked about already today, is kind of working on this. So thinking about like what are 3 questions we can use around genetics, and then their first focus is developing assessment items, kind of clusters of items that match what the new M-STEP is going to look like, that kind of format of clusters of question sets almost. So that's where they're at. So if you're interested, they're working on like getting something they can share out with people. So she would be the one to email to get the access to that materials, and they're not ready right this second. So if you email her, she'll send them to you when they are ready. So let's talk about these questions about timeline. And I know this is kind of a constant tension for us. We have all these ideas and we're like, oh, we have to get them all done, and then we're out of time, and it works every time. But so you can still find all of last year's stuff on the website. Based on what you've heard today, you kind of know what's changing and what's not. The general structure of the units is staying the same. So it's there, it's still there. Systems and scale will be done by the end of this week. Yes. So there might be some like image goes here in a couple of the very last readings, but the vast majority, it will be at a usable state. And so we know we have a lag between when we finish it on our side in folders that are hidden away to when it gets on the website front. So there's going to be an in-between step that Sarah and Christy will be emailing out access to these in folders, in zip files, ahead of when they're available on the website. And that will be systems and scale first, and then after that we're prioritizing animals and plants, which would follow soon after. And then decomposers, ecosystems, and human energy systems always end up last because they do. So that's kind of the order things will be available. And so you'll get links, and yeah, we'll keep you updated about progress so you know when they're updated on the website. Yes, that will happen. A couple other questions that came up. So a couple people were wondering about access to Word document versions of files. So those live in the whole unit zip file on the websites. So if you download the whole unit zip file, for like animals, it will have a folder in the zip file that's MS Word document, that's Microsoft Word documents, that you have all the Word documents. To access that full zip file download, you have to log into NREL because it does have the pre and post test in it, the answer key. So we've put those behind the password protection, but you all can get into the online assessment system, so that's not an issue. The other note I wanted to make is we do keep all of our, this is kind of my so there's more to the lessons than the notes that end up in the PowerPoint. And so when you're planning, I urge you to look at the entire teacher guide notes and not just the notes that we put in the PowerPoints. The notes are just steps. There's also this information about tips and extending the learning ideas. And we're adding some interesting things. I heard you talking about questions about flames. We found a video that's interesting about to add on to your experience if your students still have questions about flames, or if your students, I heard a lot of questions about why does this BTB change color, is it magical? So there's a nice video we found and put a link into about, okay, yeah, there's a reason why that BTB changes colors in a way that's understandable to students. So we urge you to look at more than just the notes that end up in the PowerPoints. And I think that's all. So we're at 2 o'clock, but maybe Christy will let me take a couple questions.